evening, and welcome to the next installation of Anna Reads. Tonight, we're picking up Chapter 2 of Unmentionable, the Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Therese O'Neill. So, let's get this ball rolling, shall we? If you need to go to the bathroom, you may want to do so now. Before we get started on Chapter 2, Bowels Into Buckets, Nature is an Obscene Caller. And we have a wonderful art plate on this page, page 17. The caption is, "How much poorer history would be if there hadn't been so many artistically talented perverts in days gone by." Yep, that is 9, count 'em, 9 art plates of women using the bathroom. Chapter 2 starts on page 18. I want you to look at your 19th century shoes. We wouldn't call them shoes today. They're boots, made of black leather and usually ascending halfway up the calf, fitting closely with a hard wooden sole. Once you wedge your foot into them, they are fastened by means of tightly spaced buttons which, if you are ever in the unfortunate position of having to dress yourself, are freakishly difficult to manipulate. This is why we put zippers in boots, ladies. So difficult that a special hook has been invented to make it possible. By modern standards, these shoes should be placed next to the fuzzy handcuffs in the window of the kind of store that sells edible massage oil. So, why don't you see if you can find something a little less daunting to wear on your feet today? Oh, there's a darling pair. Delicate color, small and sweet. Your maid insists they are merely house slippers, but they look like the closest thing to actual shoes available. We have 2 art plates for comparison. Shoes, slippers. What sort of slippers are made of kid leather and satin anyway? They aren't even fluffy. Now, out you go on the town in your prim but chic little slip-on shoes. Hello, back so soon? Oh, heavens! You descended your front steps and landed directly in a pig wallow of mud, which you're pretty sure is 90% horse excrement? Oh, poor child. Deep down, you know that's not just from horses. Come now, don't delude yourself, darling. It just makes this journey harder. This 19th century is so dirty. Whether you're rich or poor, living on a farm or in the city, you are going to be ankle deep in filth wherever you go. Heading: Filthiest Century Ever. Some would argue that the 19th century was one of the filthiest times in all of Western history, particularly in any urban developed area. Those of you who live in Macon, the paper mill isn't even that bad by comparison. Worse than when humans squatted in caves picking lice off each other, which, by the way, you'll probably still have to do this on occasion. It's where the term nitpicking came from. But take heart, not in a cave, and to squat or not will be entirely at your discretion. So there's that. Ankle deep in filth, I said, but forgive me, I was inaccurate. You will wish the filth terminated at your ankles. Foulness is everywhere, Katie. Grime and rot cling to the very air, the buildings, the people. Even the soap is made out of lard and poison. There is no such thing as fresh air in the larger cities, unless the winds are blowing it in from other locations, usually at such an icy speed that the fresh air poses a greater threat than the miasma it displaced. There is no electricity and little available in the line of clean burning fuels. Whale oil burns exceptionally well, but since you still possess a 21st century conscience, you are a heartless monster if you use it. You were a heartless monster if you used it then too, let's be real. Yet every home and business needs energy, so you must burn something, like wood or coal. Burn for heat, burn for light, and burn for steam power. Oh, you steampunks. The result is the soot and smoke of hundreds of thousands of fires saturating the sky. And these fires don't produce a charming campfire smell, though if they did, it wouldn't matter, because even that wouldn't come close to masking the other smells. Remember your street, stretching before you, filled to the horizon with sewage, rotting offal, and other garbage? Life requires people to perform actions that create waste. And like the smoke that hangs above your city, the more solid pollution is there because it has nowhere else to go. Regarding the fetid road sludge we'll have to call mud, one of the reasons it is so bad is that most of those streets weren't engineered. They simply appeared as they were needed. Many American streets started out as deer trails, and deer aren't known for ecological foresight. They're not. Such streets lack all of those little whispers of design and maintenance that would send runoff to gutters and ditches to be carried away. Instead, the runoff forms pools and collects in holes of stagnated, polluted water, like those potholes on Bass Road. In summertime, the mud won't be such a problem, unless it's a wet summer, and then, well, malaria. A French surgeon will be awarded the Nobel Prize for discovering the diseases caused by mosquitoes that congregate around stagnant water. But that won't be until 1907, much too late for you. So really, watch out for mosquitoes. In summer, you will have dust, endless, choking dust, kicked up by every horse and carriage that passes. Up, up, up. No, don't bother starting in about cobblestones. Yes, they exist, and they help somewhat with dust and sludge, but I am not setting you down in any of the places that have them, because most places don't, and frankly, you've already been cut enough breaks on this journey. Now, back to general filth in your new romantic life. Some things contribute more heavily to the problem. Take the issue of sewage treatment. There is no sewage treatment. There are sometimes conduits that sort of feel like sewers. Streets and municipal pipes dump all manner of soggy refuse into these tunnels, and the tunnels in turn carry the awfulness far, far away. Well, not so far. Actually, to the nearest large body of water, which is usually located right in the center of town, like the Thames, the Seine, or the Hudson. Interestingly enough, if you are a fan of the movie or musical or book Les Miserables, those tunnels, that's where Jean Valjean likely contracted filariasis. That's probably what killed him. The more you know. By 1860, the Thames, for instance, was visited by thousands of tons of fecal matter every day from all the pipes and runoffs that emptied into it. Imagine the smell on a hot day. Remember what I said about the paper mill? Then get over it quickly because the smell is nothing. The smell isn't the problem. The problem is that these bodies of water and their thoroughly polluted water tables are also where urban residents get their drinking water. For much of the 19th century, doctors didn't even know what germs were, and certainly didn't think deadly invisible animals could exist to a fatal capacity in water like so many tiny rabid unicorns. People died because of this. By the thousands they died, from cholera, dysentery, typhoid, everything that killed you on Oregon Trail. Diseases that occur when your body desperately tries to flush unwelcome bacteria from its digestive tract, usually killing you by dehydration in the process. Especially when your loved ones try to soothe your thirst by giving you more poisoned water. Dirty water didn't even enter people's minds as a source of illnesses. They believed that bad air caused disease, which at least was an improvement on the previous century's obsession with removing bad blood from dying patients by the half-gallon. And some Victorian doctors still do that, so pick your physician wisely. Actually, don't. Don't go to physicians. You know better, dear. You know that it would be wise during your visit to stick to coffee and alcoholic beverages, because their methods of preparation kill bacteria. Now let me tell you why you know that. There was a man, beautifully named given his influence on our world, Dr. John Snow. He treated cholera victims daily, breathed the same contaminated air, but never got sick. He was breathing their air, but he wasn't drinking their water. He drew a map of all the cholera victims in a certain neighborhood of London and noticed that all the worst outbreaks were centered on one thing: a single well pump. A dirty one, contaminated by sewage. Even stranger, there was one place in that neighborhood that suffered no cholera at all. And that was the brewery, where employees were apparently allowed to imbibe their own stock as their main beverage of the day. I wish that were a job perk where I'm at. Dr. Snow retaught the world something it must have once known instinctually, but had been forced to forget in order to survive overpopulation. Do not poop next to where you drink. And so, mid-century, sanitation reform began in most major cities of the Western world. Better sewage, better garbage disposal. Cities began employing enormous task forces to keep their streets from being hell pits of disease and squalor, which, helped. But our 21st century senses would still be assaulted. There were still limited disposal options for garbage and endless smoke choking the air. Sanitation reform also couldn't change the fact that most people still needed to use outhouses, pit toilets, and latrines for their daily evacuations. Something you are going to have to get used to also. Heading, page 25. The lady's toilette and her thunder mug. I know you've come a long way, and no doubt one of your express intentions was to be in a place where people did not discuss their bodily functions in casual company. And now here you are again, listening to your 19th century version, mother, complaining about how her toilet took an exceptionally long time today. You might as well have just stayed in the 21st century and endured the same discussions with her via cell phone. But stout hearts now. Toilet means something different here. We appropriated our word for the modern plumbing fixture from the French, who said it more like toilette. It came from a word similar to toil, that is, to do work, a job, a duty or duty, one might say. Ah, heavens, I'm sorry. Punning is the very lowest form of humor, and I do apologize. No, I don't. Until well into the 20th century, a lady's toilet was her beauty routine, the work she did to make herself presentable before facing the world. Then one day, that included pooping in an indoor flushable basin, but no lady wanted to say that, so it simply became part of her toilet. Then, the success of the appliance caused such a large, powerful movement that it just took over the word. I'm sorry, I'm very cross at myself. No, I'm not. All humans, always, have striven to remove their bodily waste far from the areas where they did the rest of their living, except when overcrowding, see above, made that impossible. Above, 2 outhouses behind a school in West Virginia, considered poorly placed. Given my own remembrances of grade school bathrooms, that is very poorly placed. This removal was done mostly by one form or another of burying. Technically, that's all an outhouse is. You dig a hole, fill it with the unspeakable horridness that comes out of your body, and then, when it's near full, top it off with dirt and move the building itself to sit over a new hole. Nature agreed with this process. In just a few months' time, human waste becomes nearly indistinguishable from the surrounding soil. No one liked outhouses, particularly house-proud women. Ladies did the best they could within their means to make their privies bearable. Still, the necessary showcased everything a 19th century woman wanted to pretend wasn't there. From stinking cesspits right down to the unpleasant headlines on the newspapers that she'd carefully cut into squares for her family to ink up their bums with. Very wealthy folks had managed to find ways to poop inside for centuries. Even regular folks tended to nature's disgusting call inside when they could, usually at night. Chamber pots, also called the pot, jerrys, night soil, commodes, slop jars, clothes stools, and thunder mugs, plus a dozen more charming descriptors that contain language a proper lady should try to avoid hearing in this century, had been lying under beds for centuries. We've actually never totally gotten rid of them. It's just that now they're plastic and have happy animal characters that sing, "You're a super-duper pooper," when used, and we call them potty chairs. Incidentally, it was tiny rumps that were the leading cause of the puzzling 2-seater outhouse. Grown-up size holes could be fatal to children. If you've ever seen Slumdog Millionaire, the outhouse scene. Plus, rural families had significantly more children than we do now, and parents would have felt no compunction at sending them out en masse to use the facilities before bed, which, by the way, they also shared. Many of us must still undertake personal interaction with feces. Any parent knows the screw-lipped breath-holding involved in dumping out a 2-year-old's tiny but offensive poops from potty to toilet. But imagine that having to do that for a house full of people, for grown men who drank more beer than water, and in a time when food conditions were such that you were near guaranteed to suffer diarrhea on a household scale a few times a month. Excuse me. And imagine not dumping it into a sparkling magic fountain that makes all the horribleness disappear in one cleansing whoosh. No. Imagine it carrying it out to the outhouse with all the care you'd use in transporting sweating dynamite and dumping it down that grievous hole, wondering if this would be the day levels had risen high enough to cause splashback. There were households in antebellum slaveholding families that found this task so repugnant that they actually paid the slave who had to perform such an odious task. Thomas Jefferson's among them. I have plenty to say about Thomas Jefferson, but I promised my dear sweet mother I wouldn't use those words on the internet. The more sophisticated placed their chamber pots inside squat little chairs with lids you could close, providing one more layer of decency and odor protection between you and your dirty secret business. They were called close stools, because they were stools you sat upon with lids you could close. Seen here. Now, the next time your doctor requests a stool sample, you can give him some, plus a fascinating bit of etymological history. Some fancy folk even moved their stools into separate little closets for convenience and privacy. These closets weren't new, really. If you tour the ruins of European castles, you will often see a closet-sized outcropping protruding from the wall where the most senior members of the household slept. This was called a garderobe, and you will note that the stone beneath this outcropping bears different erosion patterns from the rest of the wall, the result of centuries of urine and feces splashing down the side of the castle into the open latrine or water source below. It's how all your favorite Disney princesses would have relieved themselves. Except for Pocahontas and Mulan, because North American and Chinese practices were different because they didn't have stone castles, but on and on and on. When you return to the 21st century, perhaps you can use this information to move your daughter more quickly along through her tragically deluded princess phase. Then tell her Aurora and Snow White and Cinderella, also Merida, would have also hung their best dresses in that same little room. I don't even want to think about Rapunzel because that was just one tower. Believing the combination of their acrid old pee and the fresh air coming up from the toilet seat could kill vermin. That ought to scoot her right into her infinitely more pleasant horses and Harry Potter phase. Or she could grow up to be just like me, reading books on the internet. The femme is not anti-feminist, remember that. Winning the right to be/receive #1, heading on page 29. People seldom pooped down the side of their walls by the Victorian age, unless you think vultures are people too. The idea of a private separate room for your foul expulsions had reappeared, however, and it was here, in this little room, that a great battle was waged. In the late 19th century, two popular kinds of toilets were taking the Western world by storm, but only one would emerge victorious. The two contenders, water closets, toilets that flushed with water, and earth toilets. Seen here, Moole's earth toilet and the Lambeth combination water closet. I hope you can read that because I can't. Earth toilets were invented by a man named Henry Moule. M-O-U-L-E. I think that's pronounced Moule. He found outhouses abhorrent and refused to own one, demanding that all the people in his household use chamber pots, the contents of which would be buried nightly in a faraway ditch. Moule came up with the patent for the earth toilet, a device intended to add comfort and sanitation to that same process of disposal. Earth toilets were a sensible option, inexpensive, simply built, and requiring no sewage system or even a real cesspit. People simply did their business, which landed in a large bucket. They then pulled a handle, as you would to flush, except this pull brought down a layer of dirt, ash, or quicklime that completely covered both the sight and odor of the bucket's contents. At the end of the day, you'd be able to carry your tasteful little bucket of people litter to an appropriate disposal pit, where it would soon turn into safe and reasonably fertile dirt. It sounds agreeable to us, but the people of the 19th century, it sounds disagreeable to us, excuse me. But the people of the 19th century were used to dealing with human waste, and to have it pleasantly pre-buried while in transit was quite acceptable. But alas, once Victorians felt the thrill of looking down after a rush of cleansing water crashed from the cistern and carried away all signs of their beastly humanity, leaving gleaming white porcelain behind, the soddy old earth toilet didn't stand a chance. The prospect that, aside from a bit of squat and dab, they might never again have to handle their own feces was just too appealing. Can't imagine why. So the water closet, which soon expanded to contain all the new plumbing features invented to make humans less disgusting, was born. I can't think of a more timely time to have read that. Can you? Heading, page 30. Paperwork. Humans have been producing excrement for thousands of years, so we had plenty of time to hone the science of wiping. But toilet paper, in its earliest recognizable incarnation, softish, disposable, made singularly for undercarriage maintenance, wasn't commercially marketed until 1857. It was called hygienic paper, and it wasn't an instant hit. Why spend money on something you intended to wipe your rear with and throw away? Take out the middle step and you're literally throwing money down the pooper. Toilet paper as we know it, rolled, perforated, making a real effort not to feel like a fistful of bark chips and apparently totally unavailable right now, was introduced by the Scott Paper Company in 1890. They didn't want anyone to know it was them, however, and sold their product directly to pharmacies and stores through subsidiaries, who in turn sold the disgraceful item from under the counter. It takes courage to be the first family to have your name emblazoned on a product designed for dirty bottoms. Courage that the Scott family eventually showed in the early 1900s. We have an art plate here too. This convoluted ad served as a coupon of sorts. You could hand it to your pharmacist and receive the toilet paper in return without ever having to make eye contact. Again, I hope you can read this because I cannot. So, since toilet paper was barely present in the 19th century, what did folks use? In the United States, corn cobs and newsprint were the favorites. Most Americans had farms, or at least kitchen gardens in which to grow corn. The bare cobs were stored, usually soaked by the batch to soften them, and put inside the privy. They were porous and well-shaped for their job. Catalog pages and newspapers were also good options. Their paper was thin and plentiful. Often people would hammer nails into the wall of the outhouse and hang all manner of scrap paper there for later use. The European continent went in more of a wash than wipe direction, as still do many, many cultures throughout the world. Trust me, there are plenty of water scoop things, none of which can I call the names of to mind. Please see the comments as other people remember them before I do. But this is still a thing today, is what I'm saying. Placing special pitchers and sponges within easy reach of the toilet basin so people could straddle and douse their naughty bits clean. A now extinct, small, sturdy horse breed called bidet may have been the inspiration for the name that came to be attached to this device. And again, we have historical artistic perverts at work. An early bidet. Not the horse, the fixture. What else did Victorians use to cleanse themselves after evacuations? Whatever worked. Leaves, rags, even sticks. None of which, I promise, will you need to resort to while visiting. I took away your cobblestones, but I will leave you the yielding pages of the annual Sears and Roebuck catalog. This has been Chapter 2 of Unmentionable, The Victorian Lady's Guide to Sex, Marriage, and Manners by Teresa O'Neill. This has been Anna Reads. If you're interested in hearing me read something, I will be considering suggestions once Unmentionable is done with, so feel free to contact me via Instagram at serenity_sweet13, on Twitter at serenitysweet13, no underscore, or here on YouTube. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Bye!